right. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk. I don't know. Do we have Regan in the studio yet, Reggie, or she's still making her way in?
Not yet.
All right. Okay. I wasn't sure if I was opening or if Regan was. All right. For those of you who are listening.
No. It's all you. I was. The funny thing was I was going to play the other song, but accidentally I played The Water. But in this time that we're living in, it seems quite appropriate.
Yeah, well, that's true. And the other thing that's always interesting about that debate is the fact that we've got Native people who are literally being arrested for trying to defend keeping water clean, keeping land clean, and that kind of stuff. It's and now we're facing this is a direct result of obviously contaminated water. But anytime we talk about health and that kind of stuff, it's I hope at some point some people realize that you've got to prioritize things differently. But thank Reggie again. Thanks for being there. For those who are listening. The way we're going to do this for the time being, and this is happening with a lot of the WBAI shows, we're trying to have the producers do as much of the work remotely as possible. Regan is on her way into the studio today. Who knows what kind of adventure she's going to face with that. But I don't know. It may be possible Regan ends up joining us by phone for future shows. I think the whole idea of trying to... We can get into a debate on how effective all this quarantine, shelter in place, limited travel is now, and I think that is part of the conversation to have today. But I understand there's a lot of policies and practices that are being adopted by many areas of not just businesses, but life. So we'll figure this thing out. But we are going to keep doing this. I am sitting in my studio on the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation, phoning it in, as it were, to Reggie in the WBAI studios in Brooklyn. And what I wanted to do with today's show was to offer probably a little insight that nobody's getting in New York, which is a little insight to what's happening. What happens on a native territory when this kind of stuff happens? Well, I can't tell you what normally happens because there's nothing normal about this, but I can tell you what is happening, and it's rather dramatic. And while New York City is being dubbed the hot spot, there's no place that is not going to be affected by this, and we are certainly affected by here out in Seneca territory. Now, for those of you who don't know the geography, the Seneca Nation territory of Cattaraugus is about 30 miles south of Buffalo, so I'm quite a ways away from New York City. Erie County, which is the county that Buffalo is in, and butts up against the Seneca territory here, I don't know even what the numbers are, but they've been testing, and there are a number of cases out here. Rochester's had a few, Buffalo's had several, but we actually a little town close by here where my son and my grandchildren live. They just had a confirmed case, tested confirmed case announced yesterday, and then this morning we were informed here on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation that a Seneca Nation employee, non-native employee who works in or about the Seneca Nation clinics and the health centers was confirmed to have to be positive. So now the Seneca Nation is taking additional steps, and I'll talk about the steps they took last week and the steps they're taking now, just to kind of put things in perspective, and then talk about what that means and how some of these things are a little different if you're the Seneca Nation than if you're New York State or the federal government. So. The Seneca Nation president, Ricky Armstrong, did declare a state of emergency, which for many of us, we don't know what that means when a native territory does it, other than the fact that I think by doing so, they avail themselves to certain federal funding. And keep in mind, everybody knows what my view is on dependency on the federal government and that kind of the whole sovereignty argument. But this situation is a little different, and I'm going to explain why. Most of the agreements that treaties, if you were, that were entered into between the Seneca Nation and many native territories and the federal government were not just about land cessions, but they were also promises associated with not just health, education, and welfare and that kind of thing, but promises that the United States would not. I want to be careful because people say, "Well, aren't we under their protection?" You know who the United States promised to protect us from? themselves. They promised to protect Native peoples from their own citizenry, from the threats that could be imposed from them, not from some other country or whatever else. So the fact that this virus is basically gonna make it to our territories. It's not gonna, and it isn't coming from China to Seneca territory. It's coming from the non-native population predominantly that comes to our territories, or our exposure as we come and go off our territories to the non-native population. So I just want to put that into that perspective. Not trying to point the fingers, not saying, see, those damn white people got us again. Not saying that, but I want to be clear. I want to put it in a perspective so people understand. I don't think it's a terrible thing for the Seneca Nation to access or resource some of the federal systems in place in this situation, because frankly, 90% of the employees of the Seneca Nation are non-native. And that goes with gaming, maybe not so much with governance, but in a lot of the private sector retail. Having said that, let me be clear. The Seneca Nation has closed its casinos. It has closed the vast majority of what they're doing in terms of their employees. Even in the private sector, I just as I came into my studio today, I learned that the store that is right here, they're going to shut down the part of their store. They're going to operate the convenience store part of it. They're only going to have pay at the pump at the gas station. They're reducing their staff down. So there's a dramatic change in what's happening now. Getting back to the casino issue. Now, and here's the big deal. And look, Cuomo went on television and called for bars and restaurants and casinos and the like to close. But you know what? The difference here is the Seneca Nation, its entire public finance means are those gaming enterprises. So essentially, when they closed the casinos on I think it was Monday, I think they closed them. Their revenue for the entire Seneca Nation came to a screeching halt. Now, I'm not saying that they don't have some money in reserves and they can carry things for a little while, but what is a little while? I mean, the expenses that the Seneca Nation experiences on a weekly and a monthly basis would swallow up any rainy day fund or monies they have set aside. And of course, again, it's going to dramatically change the economy here for Native and non-Native people. But the one thing I do mention, and I talked about this on my show back here just a couple of days ago, is here's the thing. And the 800-pound gorilla in the room, or the $500 million gorilla in the room, is the fact that the Seneca Nation has been engaged in this long-term dispute with the state of New York over the state insisting that the Senecas have to give them money. And they have to give them what they call revenue sharing. Now, this isn't a unique thing just for New York State. This is an issue that native gaming enterprises are facing in Oklahoma, in New Mexico, and many other places. But the fact is that the Seneca Nation has put aside the money that if they were to have to pay, if this extortion payment, and that's what I'm going to call it, does have to be surrendered to the state, they have it set aside. Well, if you got $500 million set aside for this, and now this has happened, this coronavirus thing has happened, I think you got to look at that money a little bit differently. And here's an interesting conversation that I was told about. This was the lawyers and the lobbyists and the consultants, the people who work for the Seneca Nation, who give them access or are supposed to have the access to the federal government. The first thing they said is, "All right, what's your ask? What does you want the federal government to do?" And I, quite frankly, said, "How about doing your effing job?" And by that, what I mean is this controversy that many Native territories are facing over gaming revenue is something that the Interior Department, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, could just easily make a determination on. They could just rule and look at this thing and say, no, this is not legal under the terms of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. And if that happened, the Seneca Nation would have $500 million to help carry them through. They wouldn't even need the federal funding. I will talk about what they do need, but in terms of pure dollars, if they could push back against what the state's been trying to fleece them for, and and whatever needs they're going to have. Oh, look, $500 million isn't going to cover them forever, but it might get them through this. So that's a big issue. So when again, if I'm in the room and my high priced lobbyist comes in and says, "What do you want from the federal government?" I say, "Well, how about them doing their damn job?" Interior Department, because when I say that, let me explain. The Interior Department told the Seneca Nation when they requested that they do a review of the revenue sharing agreement to determine whether it was illegal under the terms of the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. The Interior Department says, you guys are asking, and we get that, but if the state were asking too, if both parties had come to the table and asked us to review it, we'd have no problem. But we hate to take a side. Well, for one thing, your job is supposed to be to protect native territories from the abuse of the states. That's kind of what the Interior Department is supposed to. It's part of one of their job description. The Indian Gaming Regulatory Act, the claim was that they put this federal statute in place to protect Native people from either organized crime or the states to the extent that they are different. So when the Interior Department says, we don't want to look at this unless the state asks to, that's like telling, and I know people are going to cringe a little bit at this, but that's like telling a rape victim, I'm sorry, we can't investigate that crime unless your accuser wants us to investigate it as well. Look, is that extreme? Yes, I'm not trying to downplay rape because I understand what that is. But let's dial it back then. That's like saying if you're the victim of a breach of contract, that you can't have the authority, which is the Interior Department, you can't have that legal entity review that contract unless the person who's breaching the contract agrees to it. I mean, it's an absurd proposition. So anyway, what's the ask of the federal government? Do your goddamn job. There you go. That's the ask that I'm suggesting. All right. So what could the federal government do? Well, one of the things that could happen, and I talked about this on my show, and I want to share this with the New York listening audience and those who listen to this show who may be native as well. Testing. There's a lot of conversation about test kits and where are there enough test kits? Well, for one thing, they aren't really test kits. What they're doing is they're swabbing, and I believe it's more of a nasal swab that they're doing, and maybe a mouth swab, but they're swabbing a person. They're not even drawing blood, from what I understand, but they're taking samples from individuals, and then they put them in test tubes, and they put them in a bag, and they put a label on, and they send it off, to. Now this is being done at the county level with county labs. It's being done at the state level. It's being done at the federal level through the CDC, but there's also a lot of private labs. There's a lot of private medical companies and testing companies who have stepped up this. Most native territories are not being availed the system of doing their own testing, and it doesn't make sense to me because, I mean, here in the Seneca Nation, they have a medical center. They have staff. They have people who can. They have doctors that come in. They have the staff, and they have the place, the facility that they could take. They could take the samples. These aren't test kits. These are samples. These are sample packages. So that you take the swab, you put it, and then whether they need cooperation from the county, from the state, or from the federal government, or somehow make some sort of arrangement with directly with the lab. Indian Health Service, whatever it's got to be. But right now, and I'm not familiar, and I've seen some posts that say otherwise, but I'm not familiar with any native territory that right now can pull samples and send a sample into a lab. I haven't seen any state where that's happening yet. And why?
I got someone here for you, John.
All right. Well,
hey,
I'm glad you're there. I'm in the middle of my rant, so soon I'll wrap it up, and then we'll get back to Regan DeLoggins, who's managed to make it in the studio.
Yeah. 1,000 apologies. I did not want to disrupt your flow, man. I just wanted to let you know
all right.
who's in the building.
All right. I'll introduce Regan in just a minute, but let me finish this thought. There, I told one of the Seneca Nation officials that I had on my show just the other day. I says, I'd play the race card on this thing. If the state isn't going to allow native territories that have the facilities, have the staff, and have the need for testing to be done, if they're going to say no, you've got to go through the county, or you've got to go through. it doesn't make sense to me because and if they think they need a special baggie or a special test tube or a special swab, then give the special baggie, test tube, and swab. But there's no reason that these samples can't be drawn here on native territories and sent in. I mean, I just think that it's whatever that the prohibition or the obstruction is, that should be lifted. I mean, and so if that's an ask, it's not an unreasonable ask, but that's what I want to talk about. All right. Good. We got Regan Dawkins in studio. Regan, I want to thank you so much for making it in. I know these are strange circumstances, and there's an increasing amount of pressure for people not to go anywhere. Basically, I don't know, and maybe you can put a little bit of what the experience in New York is like. I mean, I know some of the people who are listening to the show, if they're from New York, you guys know it. But what are you experiencing on a day-to-day basis, or from what's changing day to day? What are you experiencing?
Well, first of all, so glad to be in the studio. Sorry it took me so long to get here, but part of the reason that I was late was because of what's going on here in the city, which is that because they want people to travel less, they haven't created a public transportation ban or anything like that, but they are running the buses and subways significantly less in hopes to kind of deter people from traveling. However, people are still traveling because they haven't closed all the businesses, so folks are still having to go to and from work. So, I take the bus here into the studio every week. It's usually a quick 20-minute ride, no biggie. And I waited over half an hour for a bus, and when it did show up, it was crammed with people. Because they're running them less frequently.
Which they don't want you to be crammed with people.
Of course. So I was like, okay, great. Well, I guess and it was so full, I was like, I guess I'll wait for the next bus. And then by the time the next bus got there, I was like, all right, cool, I'll get on this one. And luckily that one wasn't as full, but still lots of people on there. And as we were traveling down DeKalb, we passed the Brooklyn Hospital Center that has a line going down the block to almost all the way to Fort Greene, which is
was it a line of people or cars?
Line of people.
Wow.
Waiting to get in, trying to cross the street, and it was just like so congested the bus had to wait quite some time before it was able to just go through the light because people are now flocking to the hospitals, which is, if you're sick, go to the hospital. That makes sense. But it was just, I was not prepared to see that amount of people waiting in a line to get medical care, to the point where they had metal police, the guard rails, the gates that they put up.
Yeah, right.
They had those going down the block to keep people sequestered, and everyone's wearing masks and gloves in that line. However, on the bus, I was one of the only people wearing gloves and a mask. And I know I don't believe that I'm not worried about myself, I guess, quote unquote, getting sick. I don't want to get other people sick, assuming that a lot of us have already been exposed. So,
well, and I want to talk about that assumption, because here's part of the problem. And look, I understand that every day we're finding another prohibition. They're trying to, cut back, again, enforce more social distancing and at some level either cutting the travel down, even if they aren't saying it, they're doing it.
Yeah,
and I'm going to tell you,
they're not saying it, but they are doing it.
I got to tell you. And I don't want to make this, I don't want people to panic or make this sound, worse than it is, but it's kind of too late. All of these actions, every one of these actions, the states of emergency, shutting down businesses, this thing has been around, and it's been in the United States, it's been in New York State since early February. Not just, so this shutting things down now is if they had done something, if they had anticipated this when they knew about it in January, because China had pretty much was letting people know what was going on, then they might have been able to, as they say, flatten the curve. I'm not sure. For one thing, there's no way of knowing if the curve is being flattened, and I'll tell you why. There is so very few testing. There's so very little testing that has been done. There's only been about 50 or 60 people tested in all of Western New York. And so when you look at the percentage of the population that has been tested, it is so small. It is so very, very small that the numbers you're getting in the news about confirmed cases, that number is almost meaningless because unless you know the percentage of the population that's been tested, you can't even determine whether. Even as that number grows, and this is one of the things that I have a bit of a problem with. You hear the both at the state and the federal level, people saying, "Well, we're going to see a spike in the cases because of the testing." No, you're not seeing the spike in it because of the testing. Maybe you're announcing it because of the testing, but there is going to be a spike of confirmed tested cases. But part of the reason that is not just because of increased testing, but because it's still spreading. It is still spreading at a somewhat alarming rate. By the time somebody has already felt sick and manages to get a test, they've been probably infecting people for 4 or 5 days at least. And so, I look at what's happening here, and it's not just about hysteria. I think there are certain politicians that are doing things because they want to, do things to say they're doing things, and it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Cuomo has actually gotten a lot of credit because he's been much more assertive than the president of the United States. But I'm sorry, even Cuomo, most of this stuff came too late. It's too late. The smoke was out of the bottle, as they say. And so I think we all have to live our lives understanding that you're probably, unless you just don't leave your house, you're probably going to be exposed to somebody, or your friends or neighbors or family are going to be exposed at some point.
Also think.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry. Well, I was going to say, I think it's also important to note that this is not an issue. This is an issue about capitalism. The reason that people are still being exposed, a lot of people, is because they still have to go to work and they still have to pay their rent. There hasn't been a rent freeze in New York. And yes, they've closed down most restaurants for people to come in, but they're still doing deliveries. There are people who are still out there working. I rode the subway yesterday because I had to go to work, and everyone on the subway with me was either black or brown, and all of us were going to work. And on the bus today, black and brown folks, all of us going to work. So it's important to note that this is not just an issue of people are spreading things. A lot of people are participating in the spread of this or becoming infected because capitalism has not taken. It doesn't consider the individual. It doesn't consider communities who might hey, let's stop the production of this need to create money, this need to create profit. I think it's an incredible issue to see that. I went to Home Depot a couple of days ago to pick up some supplies, and there were handfuls of undocumented folks waiting to be picked up for work, as they always do, and they're still there. They still have to pay their rent. They still have to get food for their families. Right. We can't have a halt on this disease until we have a complete destruction of capitalism. Well,
and then when you look at what the response has been, especially at the federal level, they want to talk about bailing out the cruise ship industry, really, or the airlines. Basically, if you're more concerned about the people, then you don't have to worry about the corporation, right? If you're worried about whether people are feeding themselves or going to have, it doesn't make any sense that you're going to bail out an industry, because that doesn't trickle down to the people most of the time. Especially in a situation if they're shut down.
Trickle down economics.
Right. So you're going to say we're going to bail out the airline industry with $50 billion, and then we're going to offer money to families too. Well, you know what? If you gave enough money to families, you wouldn't have to bail out the airline industry in the first place. Because an industry are not human beings. They are a collection. But if you take care of the individuals, this whole thing shows the flaws and the weaknesses of much of the system, and much of the system is so tied to capitalism, and much of the system is so tied, frankly, to a fossil fuels economy that
absolutely
this is. And it's not even just about unraveling. It just shows the flaws. I think some of this stuff, and I'm not downplaying the significance of this disease, and I don't want to sound like I am. And I'm not trying to, feed this as some sort of, plot to impose martial law or any of that other stuff. And look, and I know people think that and they believe that, and they're welcome to do that if they want to. I won't be a part of that. But I will say, if you look at what's happening and you look at how people are going to be impacted, it is interesting because the people who were the most responsible for the spread of this thing early on were the affluent. But as you're saying right now, the people who are going to be ultimately the victims are the ones who have to trudge in packed subway cars every day, and who don't have health insurance, who are going to be, at the base of this infection, and that's
of course,
and that's this show I want to talk about a little bit what's happening in Seneca territory because our native territories, because we're a completely forgotten population. We're not even a segment of the urban population to speak of. 100,000 native people live in New York City, but they are barely distinguished as any kind of distinct group. And they just kind of get, washed over by, by the volume of population. But when you go across native territories, you realize that our circumstance, the way the way public finance is done, and this is what I was talking about, the concern that I have with the casinos shutting down. I mean, that is the only vehicle for public finance here in the Seneca Nation. And in fact, in Oneida and Mohawk territories. Excuse me?
Same with us in Choctaw Nation. We use our casinos.
Sure. And so when these aren't just luxurious businesses, they are the public finance instrument. We don't collect tax. We don't fleece each individual with taxation. We don't impose fees on the capitalist system. That's not the way. That's not the way most native territories are financed. Or, I mean, some of them do get a significant amount of federal financing or federal funding and that kind of stuff. But for the most part, especially the ones who have gaming, that gaming represents the lion's share, if not the overwhelming, majority of their public finance. So when you shut down a casino in Rochester, or on Long Island, that's one thing. But when you shut one down on the native territory, you just stopped the entire flow of public finance. And look, I'm not crazy about how gaming changed the complexion of so many native territories in terms of whether it's annuities or dependency on the gaming. I mean, there's too much in many of the territories. The money was spent as fast as it comes in, and not much was set aside. Not much was done to use that gaming as a means to diversify economies. I had Ross John, a counselor here at Seneca Nation, join me on my last show here, and we talked about the fact that in many territories, it's been real hard, including the Seneca Nation territory, to subsidize farm programs, to subsidize the things that we need to do to feed ourselves, and subsidize some of the things that may need subsidizing on the onset, but that are more a part of our culture and more sense of community, and not just another vehicle to grant a paycheck. And I'm hoping that there's a bit of a wake up call, at least among some segments of society. We know, and Trump keeps saying every day, oh, don't worry, once we get out of this, the stock market's going to jump up to 30,000. Like most of us even care about that anyway. I mean, he's trying to poo-poo what's going to happen with the unemployment rate. And here's the thing. And even watching a little bit of the debate between Bernie and Biden before the last primary, if you don't recognize that Bob Henley's done a good job talking about this over the years, and he's on WBAI quite a bit. Many poorer people and people of color never survived from the 2008 financial crisis. The amount of people who lost their homes and were never made whole. Yeah, there's a whole lot of people who made a bunch of money off of that crisis. And the rich got richer after, not only during the Obama administration, but they certainly got richer once Trump gave them a $1 trillion tax deduction. I mean, it is not. We're going to see people suffer in ways that we've never seen before, and it's not on the front end. It's going to be more on the back end. And that's what happened in 2008. So the idea, when people start talking about, when Trump starts boasting about his numbers because the stock market was high or the unemployment numbers. Here's the thing about unemployment numbers. The unemployment rate is only determined by the people who register or for unemployment in the last month or two.
Mm-hmm.
So if you did a real number, if you did a real assessment on how many people are not employed, and just basically that, you would find out only half the population has jobs. And if you look in the people in the populations of color, you're going to find 60, 70, 80% of the people don't have jobs in many native and territories or communities of color. That doesn't show up in the unemployment rate.
I'm going to be interested to see what the unemployment rate is within the next couple months, being that most of the people that I know who work in the service industry here in New York are unemployed now. And also something that I'd like to note for New Yorkers out there who are listening, if you are applying to unemployment, the unemployment website is down. It got overrun. It's been crashed for the past 2 days. People aren't even able to apply for the unemployment that they need at this time of need because there are so many people, and the system can't carry the load as of right now. Well, I will say we're at the bottom of the hour, so we should take a little break here. This is WBAI, and Let's Talk Native with John Kane and Regan and Reggie. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back. You're listening to Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan and Reggie on WBAI. We were just discussing what's going on with COVID-19, but I'd like to hop back and start talking again about what's happening in Native communities in relation to Corona. I think that a lot of people don't know is that Native nations are excluded from the CDC's Public Health Emergency Preparedness Program. So we are not. It's so interesting that we're considered sovereign only when it's useful for capitalism to maintain its incredible power over people.
They never use words. They never use words sovereign. What they talk about is self-determination and self-governance. So you're right. They'll be heavy-handed when they want to be, but then when they say, "Yeah, well, that's up to you guys to deal with that." So that's what we're experiencing here, right?
And I can't believe, I was speaking to a lot of my friends who live on different reservations and lots of people who live in Indian country. And something that I wanted to bring up because I think it's incredibly egregious is that so Hopi and Navajo land, which is in so-called Arizona and New Mexico, but specifically in Arizona, they have one grocery store for both nations of Hopi Nation and Navajo Nation, which is being overrun with settlers who are coming from border towns to take the food off of the reservation, and other urban natives who are also doing the same thing, and leaving people in Deneta without food and supplies. Well, I can't believe that. It's just absurd.
Well, and I don't know if Jake here in my studio has the other picture that I sent him on. There's an image that went across Facebook of cars that were lined up to go to the smoke shop on the Onondaga Nation, and that's the Onondaga territory is crossed by Interstate 81, so it connects Syracuse down to like Binghamton, and so the panic again, and look, these stores that we have on our territories, they do rely on the non-native, consumers, and so don't get me wrong, but just to see the locust nature of the non-native population, the smoke shop that's on the Onondaga territory is on Route 11, which crosses the Interstate 81. This line of traffic backed up. Not only did it back up on US 11, it backed up the exit ramp and was all backed up along the shoulder of the road on the interstate just to get off to go to the smoke shop. I mean, it's so when you're talking about there being a run on our stores. Look, don't get me wrong. I understand that our commerce does depend on consumption and patrons from off our territory. But when you see something like this, and this it directly connects to what you're talking about, because when you think about the small amount of stores that we do have, that if we had to depend on them, we're always going to have to worry about whether they get overrun by the off territory populations.
Yeah, I'm looking at the GoFundMe that was created for Navajo and Hopi families in relief, and I definitely, it will correct the statement I just made, but nonetheless is just as extreme, which is that Navajo Nation and Hopi Reservation are in extreme food deserts with only 9 grocery stores on Navajo Nation to serve 180,000 people, and 1 grocery store on Hopi Reservation to serve 3,000 people. So we're talking about these, 180,000 people, and then another 3,000 people whose food is being hoarded by settlers coming in from border towns, leaving folks, leaving the elderly, leaving the diabetic, the cancer afflicted, just the children, leaving them without any supplies, to the point where folks had to create a GoFundMe in order to receive the relief that they need.
No, I mean, look, New York City is its own food desert, and especially
absolutely.
When you look at the communities where they're predominantly people of color. And in fact, when people suggest, well, how are they going to close down all the restaurants? Because from what I understand, there aren't enough grocery stores in the New York metropolitan area to handle if everybody bought just groceries and cooked at home. Many people
not at all.
They have to eat out because there isn't enough food in a grocery store. There's not enough Whole Foods or street markets or anything else. And frankly, most of those are located in the affluent communities in the first place. So, when people say, and a friend of mine was just saying, well, what about isn't takeout still going to be somewhat dangerous? It may be, but it's also a requirement, because there's no way that in a place like New York City, and again, I don't want to deflect from what you're talking about, because what you're saying is absolutely right in native territories. But this is another example of how capitalism is based on making the biggest dollar. And if the reason we don't have grocery stores on most native territories is because we don't represent a big enough population that is congregated in one area to justify those kinds of stores and for those stores to be profitable. So, and since we have to have this big taboo against socialism or against subsidizing something requirement or something that's needed like food, we say let the free market decide. Well, where's your damn free market right now? That's what I got to say.
And I think that a lot of First Nations folks are starting to do what was not done here, I think, in the occupied United States, which is that they're closing their borders. Like the Opaskwayak Cree Nation, which is about 520 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, declared a state of emergency yesterday, and in order to prepare for what COVID-19 could do to the community. And I see that kind of preparedness being done in Indigenous communities, and it's not being done in settler communities.
Well, and again,
a lot of that has.
I think, one of the things that's a challenge for that is, while there are some communities that still maintain a certain level of communal life and sense of community in general, a lot of our territories have been degraded into this capitalist system. We do count not just on people patronage in the casinos, but in the smoke shops and that kind of stuff. So when we close off those communities, we also cut off major parts of our ability to sustain ourselves, because our sustainability has been tied to that system. So I agree with what you're saying, but I'm also hoping that this is a wake-up call to a lot of native territories to realize that the system that we have conformed to places us in serious jeopardy. And I think that's what's being evidenced now.
Absolutely. And that's why when I see evidence of mutual aid happening in First Nations territory, like what is happening in Cree Nation, it excites me, because I can see that Indigenous folks are starting to think outside of assimilationist politics, which is less about the profit and more about just providing, which is in our in our traditional teachings. Profit is not a part of our teaching.
No.
It is about taking care of community, and community takes care of us, which, anarcho-communist theory calls mutual aid, and indigenous folks just call our livelihoods. Mm-hmm. But I think it's important to talk about mutual aid right now because if anyone is struggling, there are some amazing communities in New York City proper that are doing some great mutual aid work. But also, I think it's important to note that folks are being targeted on Facebook and Instagram who are talking about mutual aid. If you are discussing mutual aid, your posts are being removed.
No, is there any reason other than maybe an error in an algorithm? And what seems to be, is there anybody getting a sense for why that is? I saw a lot of people who were posting just general posts about the coronavirus, and a lot of people complaining across much of the social media saying that their posts were taken down, and they're not understanding. And I'm not trying to suggest that that people are without blame who are creating these algorithms, but is there any sense for why these posts are being taken down?
So I will only speak from my experience. 3 days ago, I tried to log onto my Instagram, and I received a message that said that I had gone against the community guidelines for speaking about mutual aid, and that I was spreading "quote unquote" misinformation, which is not true.
Yeah, and that's what I'm seeing. That's what I'm seeing, and a lot of people have suggested this. So, but has anybody been able to get to the bottom of some of this?
I think some people have. I think when it comes to Facebook, Facebook owns Instagram. That's important to note. But I think Facebook is a whole different beast because a lot of things that are related to COVID-19 are just being flagged and removed. But on Instagram, it's very different to remove a profile. In order for a profile to be completely deleted or deactivated, it has to be reported as something that is either causing harm onto the community, violence against the community, or sexual nudity and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so for my Instagram to be completely removed, it's because I was violating one of those three guidelines.
Or somebody reported that you did.
Exactly, that I was reported to be doing that, which, of course, I personally have been doxxed by white supremacists, so I know that people are out there looking at my very public profile. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, it wasn't really until I started posting about mutual aid that this happened, that my Instagram was deleted and I was told that I went against community guidelines for talking about mutual aid, in which I was referencing that we need to be providing community effort because it's an indigenous life way. That's the way we were taught. And I don't see other folks who are indigenous and queer. I don't see their things being monitored as heavily, but I see a lot of queer indigenous people who are referring to mutual aid, seeing their Instagrams being either deleted or removed.
Well, and let's talk. I mean, again, and I share your concern about that, but let's get back to the actual mutual aid, because I think one of the things
of course, yes, let's talk about mutual aid.
Because one of the things that's important is understanding that while social media may help, the true sense of being a community and helping each other requires that we kind of do more than just post a message. And
of course.
Here in Seneca territory, for instance, somebody did start a Facebook group page that kind of established areas of I live on the Cattaraugus territory of Seneca Nation. So where I live is an area they call Indian Hill. Not the best name, but that's what it's called. So they formed a group, but we all know each other. We don't all know each other just because of Facebook. So I think one of the ways to do the workaround, especially when some of the social media collapses on us, is to make sure that we do form relationships. I'm not saying we got to spend a great deal of time within 6 feet of each other, but regardless, true mutual aid is going to be from people who help people. And while I think social media is a way to share those ideas and the information, the best way is for us to make sure that we perform those tasks to help each other.
Of course, we have to be in action. It's not mutual aid; it's just a theory, which is complete. It's useless if we just talk about it. So I would like to say that if folks are interested, if you can just, go on the internet, you just have to do NYC Mutual Aid spreadsheet. It will provide you with a number of people providing mutual aid. The Indigenous Kinship Collective, which is a collective I belong to, we are doing mutual aid to unsheltered communities, passing out care bags to anyone who needs them with, not just gloves and hand sanitizer and all those things, but food, sanitary napkins, alcohol wipes, anything like that, canned goods. So there are definitely people who are putting these theories into practice. And so and you don't need to be a part of an organization to provide mutual aid. You just need to not participate in capitalist individualism of hoarding items for your own survival, but pass them out. If you live in a building, are there elderly folks in the building that can't go get things? Knock on their door, if you want to maintain the 6-foot rule, that's cool, but just give them a knock. And do you need help with anything? Do you need any of our supplies? I think Indigenous folks, we know this because this is how we're raised. Mm-hmm. We were raised in community. We were raised to take care of our elders, our children, 7 generations. Like we know what we're doing. And I think that if we can transpose these inherently Indigenous beliefs to our communities, then we can see something that honestly is something the world has never seen before, which is actual mutual aid within community.
Well, and it's really important, especially in areas not only where there are food deserts just because of capitalism, but even because of population. Again, New York is kind of a unique animal, not throughout the world, but certainly for many of us, especially if you're native. When you go to New York, you realize that it's a completely different world, and so the whole idea is you've got to be able to figure out, well, what is the best way to help people? I mean, one of the things that's happening in a lot of native territories has been the food sovereignty movement. And I'm hoping that this thing gives it a huge boost. I'm hoping this is going to be one of those, epiphanies that people who may have been on the fence about the necessity of making sure that we not only maintain and secure a food supply, but in terms of a storage, but we continue to maintain the ability to produce food. And again, I'm not talking about bagged lunches, although that's important right now. But in the long term, things that are storable, whether it's canned goods or doing Seneca Nation. There was a big push to try to do a bigger canning project here. Some people have been maintaining it for a couple of years, but it's been small. So the idea of doing something more than that, storing the things like beans and corn and the things that are so much a part of our diet, that those things are the kind of things that you can store for years. Essentially, they don't have necessary expiration date.
Have seed banks, which I think is great.
And that's a start of it. That's kind of a start of the food sovereignty movement, especially because those seed banks are also heirloom seeds. So they're parts of our diet that we've had for thousands of years that are being maintained. But until we put some of that stuff to practice and we start to create the mechanism for making sure the staples are there for us, that we're not just treating Indigenous food as a luxury or a gourmet item, something we do only for ceremony. We got to do more to up that ante, and I'm glad that the food sovereignty movement is something that not only is it in the vernacular, but it's actually coming into place, and I'm hoping that in events like this. Look, and I got to tell you, we talked about it on the last show. I've talked about it with Reggie in the past. I've looked at the possibility of tremendous collapse to the systems that people have grown accustomed to. Whether it was climate change or whether an economic collapse or the capitalist system caving in on itself, social unrest, global conflicts, and racism. All I never even considered a pandemic in the mix of those other things that could contribute to this kind of collapse. And now here we see it. And I got to tell you, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that any one of those things that could have began a domino effect. This is probably the most underestimated cause that at least in my own mind. And we're going to find out just how much this impacts everything.
I think that I also, since we're speaking about food sovereignty, I do want to plug a little thing that I know is happening at Mil Mundos, which is in Brooklyn. It's a bilingual bookshop, but they're hosting a food sovereignty working group in conjunction with the Queer Kitchen Brigade. And I believe that it's going to be moved online because of what is going on. But if anyone is interested in that, it's Mil Mundos, MILMUNDOS. And it's a facilitated talk with the Queer Kitchen Brigade, which it was originally going to be held at the May Day space. But as I said, I think they're moving all their programming online. But if anyone is interested in learning more about food sovereignty within New York City, this is a great way to get started and start, because, it's not just Indigenous communities that need to be working on food sovereignty, but also Black communities and other brown folks, people of color in general, especially in urban settings. There are a lot of wonderful food sovereignty working groups based in different small parks throughout. I'm thinking specifically in Brooklyn, but I just wanted to plug that there is a food sovereignty working group that is starting in April, hosted by Mil Mundos. If anyone is interested, this is the time. Because as you said, I think that there's a lot of foodways that we participate in ceremony or when we're back on the res or something like that. But we can be doing that at home, and the food's growing these things at home.
And the food sovereignty issue isn't just about growing food. It's also about networking. So your supply chains are more part of your cultural exchange. So you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? So I think making sure that look, we're growing a lot more white corn up here in Seneca territory than we have in the past. And honestly, some people put in so many acres of white corn that it didn't all get harvested. And look, is that a shame? Yes, it's a shame. But I would rather see the effort put in, and then as more and more people understand the value of it, not only will more of it be harvested and then dried, and then stored, we can create the networks of Native people who may not necessarily live on a Native territory that also not only need the stuff, but from a life sustenance standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint. So I think forming the relationships and the networks. Yes, first close to you, but then let that network, create it's not really a network if it's not connected to other groups of people. That's the definition of a network. So, but no, I agree with that. We are going to take. I do want to mention.
Oh no, go ahead.
We're close to the top of the hour, and we are going to take calls. So I want people to, again, to join us on the show. The number is 212-209-2877. That's the number to call. I always, feel like I've got to throw it out there that, especially in times like these, where WBAI as a station is so important to people, especially if you're finding yourself sitting at home a lot more. Look, there's a lot of things that you can donate money to, but if we can encourage people to put WBAI on that list, I still wish that people would go to the pledge lines and make a contribution to WBAI and support the station that is looking to inform you in ways that no other places. You can go to the pledge line. It's 516-620-3602. You can become a one-time donor. You can become a BAI buddy. You can do it in the name of Let's Talk. And then people will say, look, that Let's Talk with Regan and John, they signed up another buddy. So by all means, go to the pledge line, 516-620-3602. You can go online at give2wbai.org. That's GIVE, the number 2, WBAI.org. And you can follow the prompts to do, again, a one-time donation. You can become a BAI buddy. You can even follow the prompts there and look, and it'll tell you how to do a text donation. So I want to throw that out there. I don't know, Regan, you want to close something up before we take a break here at the top of the hour?
Oh, no, I'm ready to do it. So let's just go for it.
Okay. All right. We'll be back in a minute.
All right, welcome back to WBAI. This is Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. We have 2 calls. Hey, caller, what's your name? Where are you from?
Hey, this is June from Manhattan.
Hey, what's up?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, hey. I was just listening to, you were speaking about food sovereignty, and that sounds very opportune because I am a novice urban gardener, and I have been working for the past several years in a kind of hectic community garden in the Bronx. And I just recently have been really trying to rack my brain as to how I could get some young partners to help out, who have an interest in, like, a passion for doing the gardening, because I realize it's.
Oh, we lost you there.
Oh man, I was really enjoying her commentary too. No, a lot of this.
Caller, can you try to speak up?
Do we? I don't know if we do. We lose her completely?
No, she's still there.
Can you hear me now?
A little better, but try harder.
I don't. Maybe she needs to dial back in. She might have something in her signal might have gone.
Yeah, give us a call back in at 212-209-2877. We'd love to hear what you have to say. But we do have a next caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Walter from the Bronx.
Hi,
Hey,
Walter. How
Walter.
are you doing?
Hey, haven't been on in weeks, but something happened yesterday that really shows what this system is doing. I was supposed to be a backup for my wife, who was supposed to have surgery this week, which was then canceled because of the virus thing. She's 78. I ended up being diagnosed during this time with malignancy. And she has been doing shopping for me for foods that I'm required to eat to keep out of being worse. So yesterday, she went out shopping for me. And what happened was that she coughed because of the chemicals that were being used in the supermarket to, I guess, purify the air. And a man came out of the next stall and said, "You coughed," and he pushed her shopping cart into her.
What?
Yeah, he pushed her shopping cart into her, and she reacted by pushing hers into him. He grabbed her and threw her down, dumped the shopping cart over her, and then when she started screaming, tried to pick her up under the arm. She has a torn rotator cuff, which she's been treated for. And he retore the rotator cuff. That's what this system is bringing us to.
That's incredible. First of all, I'm so sorry that happened to her. That's just that's unacceptable. And it frustrates, I think, all of us, because we know that this is not the first instance, but there's incredible violence against people right now with this idea of either, people are fearful of the disease spread, or they're in competition with one another to get, toilet paper.
Right.
It's a loss of humanity in an incredibly disgusting way. And I'm really sorry. That's
Well, and this is,
horrible.
Reggie and I talked about this a little bit. We talked about the fact that there's a certain social degradation that takes place, especially when people are are placed under stress. And with the amount of, whether it's racism or biases in general that people have, when you throw something else into the mix, it's why I condemn so much, Trump calling this the Chinese coronavirus. I mean, it's just labeling it so you can, pinpoint somebody else to blame. And he doesn't even pull any punches. He does blame, like this is their fault kind of thing. And now when you create a situation like this, now you can start looking over your shoulder and look at somebody who coughs and says, oh, now we have another way to determine who the other is. I'm the healthy person. You're the coughing person. So you're the other. You're the threat to my life. And if that's the world that we live in, and we allow that to take over our not only something in our minds, but a physical action like rejecting or pushing out or tossing to the ground somebody just because they cough. I mean, it's amazing how quickly some of this stuff can unravel. Now, I'm not suggesting that all human beings are going to degrade to this level of social behavior, but it doesn't take everybody. It only takes a few to cause some of the stuff to really go bad. And look, I'm really sorry to hear that happen to this woman and to your wife. And I hope that everybody, I hope that everybody got through it okay, in spite of, I mean, obviously, if you can sustain an injury, you sustain an injury. And I think that doesn't, it makes me think of something else. When I hear Donald Trump, and I hate to keep mentioning his name, when he says that this is going to be treated as a war, that the United States is going to be victorious and it's going to be a great victory and they're going to come through this just fine. That's like saying the people who aren't going to come through this just fine, that it's okay. Not everybody's going to come. Yeah, not everybody is going to come through this okay. There are people who are going to die. There are people who are dying. There are people who have died. And to use this kind of celebratory tone, or this kind of, even if you want to, use this kind of bluster to talk about how great Americans are, there's going to be some very, very fine people who will not survive this. And, and not only are they not going to survive the disease itself, there are going to be victims of what happens socially because of this. And Walter's call explains it illuminates that.
Yeah. Walter, are you still there? Okay. Well, I was going to say, if you, before we go on to the next caller, that I would definitely reach out to some people in the Mutual Aid Network in New York City to provide both of y'all with supplies so that doesn't happen again. And we thank you so much for your call. We're going to go on to the next caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, this is June. I tried, and this is my third try, so I'm going to try to make it really quick. My phones are so temperamental that maybe if I don't finish, you could give out an email, and I could follow up by email.
Sure, we can hear you well right now.
Okay. Well,
yeah, thanks for calling back, June.
At all. No problem. On food sovereignty, I was starting to say that I'm an avid amateur urban gardener looking for partners for a small, chaotic community garden in the Bronx. I haven't found a good network to pull some young people in. I am looking for young partners. I've got a couple of issues myself that I definitely need some younger people, and I really don't have time to do it full justice. So I don't know if your food sovereignty network holds any advantages that I could plug into, but that's my mission. I really want to. I'm near Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. Our garden is near Yankee Stadium, and if you or anyone listening knows of any schools or whatever, any places I can plug into, I would love to touch bases with some people who are interested.
Absolutely.
I love the gardening idea. Urban gardening has so much vast potential, and it's so rewarding.
I would say that there is a community called Take Back the Bronx. It's a radical grassroots collective that organizes in the South Bronx, and they are doing a lot of really great mutual aid specifically around food, providing cooked meals and groceries to Black and brown folks throughout the Bronx, Queens, and Brooklyn. And they're probably someone who would be really great to contact. As I said, their name is Take Back the Bronx,
Okay.
and you can find them online. And if you want to reach out to them, I think that'd be a really good connection to make. It sounds like you're doing some great work, and I think collaboratively, y'all could really, really flourish.
That's an excellent idea. Thank you so much. I will definitely follow up with that. Thank you.
Thanks for calling, June. We appreciate it.
Man, that's a good call, and I'm glad June made the effort to call back in. I think the idea of doing this urban gardening is it is an important thing, because, for one thing, anybody who thinks that if the bottom drops out, well, we can always garden later, or we can always do it later. If you don't learn to put your hands in the dirt now, and even when it comes to climate change, if you gardened 50 years ago, you may find out that things have changed since then. So don't just rely on what you think is this, genetic memory that you think you have that's going to allow you to do something if you've never done it before. We don't need to wait until we're in desperate times. We should do some of these things now, while they are a bit of a luxury, perhaps, or something that has a different value in our quality of life, because there may come a time that we're dependent on it. So absolutely. Again, thanks, June, for calling in.
Let's go on to our next caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hey, how you doing? This is Charlie from Roslyn Heights.
Hi, Charlie. How you
John
doing?
Kane. How you doing?
Hey,
Okay.
Charlie.
Listen, I've been listening to John Kane for a while, and John, you know, I've been listening to you and calling in and stuff. And you know, you speak a lot about justice and injustice in the world, and you want to fix it and stuff. I think I have an answer for you. You could stop hanging up on your listeners and maybe start treating them with a little respect, because this station was created by a European man, Lou Hill. And he wanted it to be a democracy with an exchange of ideas. You can laugh all you want. You can laugh all you want, but I'll come in there. I'll debate you if you want. I challenge you to a debate. Okay? I really would.
Look, Charlie, you want to keep having the same. You make your case every single time, and eventually I do cut you off, because your conversation becomes meaningless after a while. You keep trying to promote this idea that capitalism ended slavery, and that it's and that it came from Florence. It was the answer to everything. And look, you have that opinion, and you're entitled to that opinion, and you get plenty of airtime to express some of that stuff. But eventually, you just keep going on, and you don't want to. You think that you are entitled, that you have some sort of entitlement to occupy the airspace, and you don't. This is something that I afford listeners, including yourself. But I'm not going to let you take over the program. So, and it's a shame that in even today, this was the best thing that you could contribute to the conversation. That's sad on so many different levels. So anyway, thank you, Charlie, once again.
And just to add a little bit of clarity there, I just wanted to correct Charlie on this. Yes, the network itself was created by Lou Hill, but the station itself was founded by Louis Schweitzer. So I just wanted to add a little bit of clarity. And Louis Schweitzer was the person responsible of donating WBAI to the Pacifica Network.
Well, and I don't know if Charlie's comments was to somehow, let all these uppity people of color know their place because a white man started something. I'm sorry, I'm not. Look, thank you, Charlie, once again.
I don't know who you are, Charlie, and I think it's probably for the best. But I will say that capitalism is a disease, and that's it. On to the next caller. What's your name and where are you calling from? Hello?
That's you. Hello?
Hey.
Is that me?
That's you. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
I am Chief Eagle Spirit Dancing. I'm calling from Connecticut, formerly from the Bronx. I've been in the Bronx for 49 years. What I really want to say is not enough time, but I'm going to try to consolidate it as quickly as I can.
Sure, what's up?
What a lot of people don't realize is that when you don't learn from history, you're condemned to repeat it. America is a recycling program of that idea. Like capitalism is the be all to end all. Yes. Hello?
Yeah, we're listening.
Yes. Okay. And that indigenous peoples around this country are, in terms of our separation, I take offense to Indian country. The reason why is I was adopted. Like a lot of indigenous peoples who were either taken off the reservation or families fled, over the past couple of hundred years, melted into society. I was one of those who grew up in identity crisis because I looked Hispanic, but come to find out that I'm a member of the Congaree peoples of South Carolina, who, as the government has said, is extinct. I'm not supposed to be talking to you right now.
Well, it sounds like you're alive.
Yes, very much so. God has brought me back to my roots, my culture, language, etc. But what I wanted to say is with this coronavirus, my son was sick 8 weeks ago with a temperature of 102, and I had natural herbs that I have been using for the past, let's say, about 15 years now. And within several hours after giving my son raw garlic, golden seal, echinacea, he was well. And I'm talking about running around in the house. We give too much credence to Western medicine.
Absolutely.
That's a serious issue that I have. And not to mention that we are a gluttonous nation, and we eat all of the wrong foods, Wendy's, Burger King, McDonald's, etc., etc. And I believe that this government knows that the people are unhealthy here. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, I have to deal with what's in my backyard first before I can deal with anyone else. Our people have to learn to shift our diets to a more healthy diet and not eating so much. The Western way is 3 meals a day and just be gluttonous, eating all times of day and night. It's not going to work. Your immune system is not going to be able to handle it, especially with all of the toxins. And, it's just a recipe for disaster, and I believe the government knows this. I'm personally not afraid of this coronavirus. I'm not. I'm 52, will be 53, so when I don't get sick, I don't get sick. And if people would learn to adjust themselves properly with their diet, exercise, we would be much more of a healthier nation than we currently are. There's much more that I would like to say, but I don't have no time. I want to thank you for your time. And as we say in Cherokee language, Wado.
Yes,
Wado. Many thanks.
Thank you so much.
Well, and I want to mention one thing. I think it's important that people realize that there are certain things that there is no medicine for other than what your body can do. And viruses and many bacterial infections, it's your body that either fights it off or doesn't. And these viruses, any virus, cold virus, flu viruses, there's always going to be a certain level of mortality that's associated with some of these, especially these diseases if you have an underlying condition. But to be clear, there is nothing that a doctor is going to do for you that is going to make this disease leave your body. The only thing it can do is try to keep you otherwise healthy enough, keep you well oxygenated. That's why respirators are so important. It's your body that has to push this out. And that's the case with everybody. We go through this every day. Our bodies have antibodies that fight these diseases, and they fight fungal diseases, they fight bacterial diseases, and they fight viral diseases. So I think it's important that people realize that your body has to be in good enough shape to have a strong enough immune system to fight this stuff off. Otherwise, you will be at risk of being a victim of this virus or any virus for a much longer period of time. So I just I'm not going to promote home remedies for an illness. I always go back to this notion that food is our medicine. And that the healthier that we eat and the healthier our lifestyles are, the better off we're going to be. And look, and it's not to say that there aren't some things that overtake our bodies. They do. None of us live forever, and so some of that stuff is it is what it is. But I just want to be careful because I don't want to suggest that and I have a real aversion to promoting a home remedy for this or for anything else. At least not on my show, because if I haven't experienced it, if I haven't done something and been able to see a measurable effect of it, effect that it's had, that I worry about that stuff. And that's where some of these social networks, some of the social networking has banned a ban on so many of the posts because I think there's a concern. I mean, look, some people are saying you could drink bleach and get rid of this thing. There were people who were putting out some...
I think that there's a...
Go ahead.
I think that there's a distinct difference between someone being like, oh, you can drink bleach versus what our caller was saying, which is that there are ways to take care of our bodies.
I'm not condemning what the caller said. I'm just trying to make a point in that. Look, good caller. It was good to hear from him. I just want to be... I just want to walk that line a little bit, and it's not because I don't think there are healthy things that we can ingest, and there certainly are medicines that we have used historically, thousands of years, and but I don't want to. Let's Talk isn't a medicine show, so I just I'm just careful.
I'm thankful for the revival that Black and Indigenous healers have been having, especially, before COVID-19, but even now, to remind us of our traditional medicines that exist. I also take Advil when I have a headache. So, I am also part of that constant binary between colonial and indigenous.
Yep, Western.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, they exist. And I don't think it's it has to be one or the other. But I'm definitely super thankful to see all the healing remedies that are coming through. Though, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't wash your hands with antibacterial soap.
There you go.
But speaking of, we need to go on to our next caller. Where are you calling from, and what's your name?
Yes, hello. I am the Phantom from Brighton Beach, calling in once again. Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, John had mentioned about vegetable gardens. Well, here we go again. What about the WBAI vegetable garden on Atlantic Avenue between Hoyt and Bond Street instead of the metal monster cars?
Well, Phantom, I know you're an advocate of tearing up the. I know you're an advocate of tearing up the streets and turning them into gardens, and I'm not saying that wouldn't be a much better solution for concrete and pavement, but I mean the reality is there are plenty of places that don't need to have the concrete torn up that could be growing and just distributing healthier food. And so I don't think your plan is going to have much in the way of legs, put it that way.
Okay, another point, please. While I do have the time, okay. For thousands and thousands of years, the human race has been eating and torturing animals. And finally, this is the bad karma payoff. The animals are finally paying off the human race for all the torturing and abuse that's been heaped upon them. What can I say? It's true. There it is. Bad karma payoff.
All right, well, Phantom, I appreciate your thoughts on this. I mean, look, we can get into a lot of debate about I get the food cycles, I guess. I eat meat. I don't torture animals, and I think that there is a problem with the way that we the way we choose to eat and what we choose to eat and where the food comes from. And so I don't know if this is, I'm not big on karma, or I will say that I do attribute many of the diseases that we experience today on the actions of man, including this one. And this is my thoughts on this. And I've talked about this a couple of times. If this disease really did come from what they call these wet markets in China, the reason those wet markets in China exist, and we talked about this last week, and we talked about this idea of urbanization. For the first time in human history, more people live in cities than live in rural areas. So when you try to combine these clashes of cultures, people who have lived sustainable lives and have lived in the bush and that they do eat, they're hunters and gatherers, and you try to combine this hunter-gatherer lifestyle with creating huge markets where you bring a lot of animals, live and killed, some dressed, some undressed, and you put them in these large markets. You have created a petri dish of and an environment that is not natural. I think it's entirely possible that this virus, and there's some indication that it began as an animal virus that went from animal to human to human to human and that kind of thing. But but part of the reason that many of these things, including many cancers, including diabetes, including so many other things, it has to do with our lifestyles and what we've done to the earth, what we've done to the water, what we've done to the air, and what we do to ourselves. I mean, again, I can't get away from the fact that romaine lettuce ends up being being taken from shelves, not because romaine lettuce is poison, but because of E. coli, because of the way that they fertilize fields and what they're spraying on fields. I mean, some of the behavior that man has made even something that should be relatively healthy a threat to life. So, I throw that out there, and I try to put this in a perspective. Look, I've tried to say people are entitled to their opinions, but and there are pieces of what is said in some of those opinions that I think have validity. But I'm never going to say what I say is true. I express an opinion that I formed based on the information that I've availed or has been availed to me or that I've availed to myself. But I don't know that this is payback from the animal kingdom, but
I think that demonizing consuming animals, especially to indigenous folks, is super problematic because it demonizes our indigenous foodways, which often rely on consuming animal. I say that I've been a vegetarian for most of my life and was a vegan for most of my life, and I'm now back being a vegetarian, and all the vegans can, you can let out your breath now, and I'll see you on Instagram. But I'm a vegetarian. I don't eat meat. And because I don't believe in the industry of meat consumption here in urban settings, but when I am back on the res, I will 100% grab on some venison and frog legs because that's what we do in the bayou. Yeah, but my point is that we're not going to. I don't feel like it's. I definitely believe that animals, as in all my relations teachings, are a part of our lives as much as we are a part of theirs, and that we have done an injustice to animals in a real way by allowing capitalism to infiltrate our environments to the point where, as you said, romaine lettuce is inedible, or the way that animals are treated in the industry as if they have no spirits and souls. And though I also do not believe in karma, I do see that a lot of this is connected to the continuation of industry through capitalism, through need of profit.
Yeah,
but we have a bunch of callers on the line.
Well, and there is a difference between balance and payback, and I think that's what I guess that's my point.
All right. Oh, yeah, but maybe we should take a break. Well, let's take one more call and then hop on a break because we have quite a bit. Caller, what's your name and where are you calling from?
I'm not sure if I am the voice on the air.
You are the person.
Okay. My name is Jeff. I'm calling from Manhattan, and I'm really glad to have just come on your show. I have not been listening to WBAI as much as I should. However, this show is important, and BAI is a voice of the people, and you're really doing a great justice to the responsibility of having the show. I've been listening to NPR, and what I'm getting from NPR is that, well, pretty much technical information, which is also practical and good to know. However, listening to your show and thinking about how this virus is spreading, I am seeing the possibility of a greater effect on culture, so to speak. And when I hear you speak about communism, which I support, I also think of the film in the 60s called Koyaanisqatsi, which was a film about a vision of a Hopi shaman seeing the future as a catastrophe. And do you know about that? And I will look forward to other shows.
You're the second person to bring that up within the past 2 weeks, actually. It's a film from, it was from the
80s.
1982.
It's really an amazing, as I mentioned before, it's an amazing film documentary, but it's a non-narrative documentary, and it really talks about the balance between westernized culture and traditional ways, and it's very through the use of the music of Philip Glass. It's very interesting.
Yeah, Reggie, I asked. Do send me a link to that if you can.
Yes, I totally forgot about that.
I do want to check it out.
Both, Jeff brought this up, and a caller last week brought it up, and maybe once COVID is no longer such a threat, we should do it as a screening here.
A really good idea. It's mind blowing, and you know what? And I've seen the entire series of it a couple of times over, and the thing is that it's so non-lineal. It's because there is no talk about this. It's just the use of images and music, and so it's out there. It's non-abstractive, definitely, but it's worth checking out.
Well, and again, I thank the caller for bringing it up again.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jeff. We appreciate it. We're definitely going to have to figure out how to do a screening with that in the coming weeks.
Mm-hmm. or months, whatever the case may be.
Around. Yeah, months. Yeah, exactly. All right, we need to take a little bit of a break. We're at the bottom of the hour. This is WBAI. Let's talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Let's Talk with John Kane and Regan DeLoggins. We've got a bunch of phone calls, so let's hop on to the next one. Hi, caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Yes, Steve here from New York City.
Hey, Steve.
Hi, Steve.
Hi. Just speaking about the our demagogue in chief and his words yesterday, the very first words out of that mouth, the dog whistle to very well knowing what waves he's generating. We want to ask who the murderer is here of Americans who are dying and who are going to die. We want to ask that question very, very hard. We want to look at that demagogue and he's telling us less than a month ago that this was all a hoax, like climate change is a hoax. You know, just ask any polar bear and her cubs. The demagogue is answerable for the fact that he was offered back at the very end of last year, because the Chinese were dealing with this in November and December of 2019. He rejected the testing kits made available by the World Health Organization because they weren't made in America. And as a result, we are not prepared to do what the World Health Organization, its leader, who you've heard many times if you're paying any attention to what international cooperation is going around the world right now, that World Health Organization is praising China on its efforts, its unprecedented efforts to halt, to abort this catastrophe that's hit humanity successfully. They're not generating literally new cases anymore, and they've literally passed the worst of it. But Donald was still, as I tell you, less than a month ago telling us hoax, and didn't come around to changing that until the day after the March 11th primary in those three states, when he wanted to see to it that his Biden comes in, who he would squash, wrap around his little pinky. And then he comes and tells us there was nothing wrong with people lining up, waiting for hours, body on body to get to polling stations.
Well, and let's not forget also he rejected the notion of spending any sizable amount of financial resources to deal with this. He wanted when Democrats in Congress were suggesting coming out of the gate with $8 billion, he said, "No, $2 billion. We didn't need to do $8 billion." Now he wants to suggest a $1 trillion stimulus plan because he's more concerned about the economy than he is about people. I mean, you're right. This is but this is the American system, and so when I hear, and this isn't just a pitch for Bernie Sanders, but there really does have to be some revolutionary change to what's happening in the world, but certainly as a Native person and being impacted so much by what is the colonial state of the United States, there's got to be some change, and this is a lesson. I mean, this isn't going to wipe out half the population, but there are plenty of people who are going to perish because of this, and you would hope, because the widespread nature of this thing, that many people will at least let some of the losses that are incurred because of this be a lesson for the future. We can only hope.
Let's go on to the next caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hey, Arthur from Queens, New York. Good afternoon to you.
Hey, how you doing?
Thanks for calling.
Hey, thank you for taking my call. But I guess like everyone else, I'm watching this, and I see it as a couple of things. One is I think it's years, a lot of what I'm talking about really what's going on in the government. Years of putting things down the road, be it a Green New Deal, be it, you know what I'm saying, talking about clean oil or whatever. I just see that as one thing.
Yeah.
Just kicking the can down the road until we finally run out of the road. And the stupidity of people who I saw later, the mentality of the Rick Perrys, who said we need to get rid of certain departments like the EPA, and he couldn't remember one of the others he wanted to get rid of. But that's the mentality I'm looking at now. When you see that the people they seem to trust, the person they trust more than anything on television is the doctor. Other than him, they're listening to this clown that they put in office just because they saw him on TV. And the only person they really trust is the doctor. And the mentality of people the guy who called earlier with the, we need to, what do you say about money or about the I can't even think of the word I'm using, but people like Grover Norquist, who had said for years, we need to take the government, put it the size of that you can drown it in a bathtub. This is what the government is needed for, what's going on right now. This is what people are waiting for the government to help them. And what they're hearing is a clown who's trying to compare himself to Franklin Delano Roosevelt and saying silly things. And, it's a crap show.
He rates himself as a 10 for 10. He gives him he gives himself an excellent rating.
And don't want to talk about the fact that there were doctors who was telling him about this months ago, and I'm pretty sure he was probably saying, along with some others in his, administration, they were probably under the Obama administration. Who cares what they say?
But even if he didn't believe that, the one thing that is clear is that his biggest concern about this whole thing was the PR and the negative PR that it was going to mean to him. Even if he didn't believe that this was about everybody out to get him, which I'm not sure that he didn't, but he was certainly concerned. I mean, when he says that he wants a ship to stay out in the ocean, a cruise ship to stay out because he didn't want the numbers. He likes the numbers. Well, he likes the fact that he didn't have to count those numbers as his. I mean, this is the absurd stuff that has come from this moron in the White House. So I agree with you. Go ahead, Regan.
I also agree, but I also want to. There is something that I do want to touch on, which is that Trump is. I mean, he's a moron. We all know this. Like, this is just, he's a moron. But what's really important to focus on is that it's not just the Trump administration that has let down the people. It's this entire settler colonial government that is based on intended bureaucracy, profit, obviously inherently tied to capitalism, and institutionalized racism. Those are the three the three cardinal directions, if you will. I'm going to have to think of a fourth at some point, that really bring down people, especially in this extreme time of need. Yes, Trump is a buffoon. We write him off, or we don't, or we pay attention to what he has to say. But I would really urge people to take this moment to radicalize yourselves and realize that we are not tied to this settler colonial government, and we have the ability to break away and to form something better. And yes, some people may want to take those steps and vote for Bernie Sanders, and that's great if that's what you do. That and I as Reggie and I were talking about in the studio, he is our compromise. In the expectation of what we see as radical. So, if that is a way that you see that you can make a difference, that's great. But also continue to radicalize yourselves and realizing that we are not bound to this government and that we have the ability to create something better.
Yeah, and when you talk about creating something better, this isn't just about overthrowing the government. It's about untangling yourselves from the systems of oppression, which is something I talk about as an indigenous person all the time. It's about untangling ourselves from things. There's nothing that binds us to many of the things that we by default end up depending on. We don't need to depend on some of this stuff. And again, I think your point is exactly right, Regan. If you listen to even a piece of what the debate between Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden, you can tell that Biden is, even as he tries to address this thing, he will not understand or even begin to consider the bigger underlying problems that exist with much of the systems that exist in the United States. He's saying, well, we can just put a Band-Aid on this one.
I totally agree. We have a couple more callers left, so let's get to those. Caller, what's your name and where are you calling from?
My name is James, and I'm in Brooklyn.
Hi, James.
During the course of your earlier conversation, I came up with the question, do humans invite capitalism to invade their productive life ways, or are they found to be foul? Or I'm not sure how you pronounce this word. FAUX. Four actors before four actors before the forces and arguments of organized plunder. So that the fact of the dejection and of bad mental health attests to a native resistance. And lately I've been reading this book by Gerald Posner, Farmer, Greed, Lies, and the Poisoning of America, about the campaign of a Dr. Wiley in the late 1800s, early 1900s, to get a Pure Food and Drug Act passed in Congress. Finally succeeded in 1906, but there's a quote from the Journal of the American Medical Association from that time, in which it is quoted saying about these peddlers of nostrums. It's poisonous nostrums. I mean, they were selling like heroin, cocaine over the counter, with or without a doctor's prescription. It had its roots back during the war with Mexico. That was a great. Suddenly, soldiers, veterans, they all needed painkillers. Anyway, the quote here says that this business, it thrives on misrepresentation and fraud. It fattens on the gullibility and credulity of the ignorant, and it prospers by deceiving the sick and the afflicted. And it isn't so much the producers, the actual makers of these nostrums, but it's the promoters. It says here that the promoters who wanted no restrictions on how they marketed their products to consumers. And they were succeeding in a big way, big money back in those days. And it seems to be undergoing a revival here. I mean, it's totally neoliberalism. But back in those days, they didn't have such an apparatus of command and of close surveillance, the cybernetic information processing, the machine intelligence, and so forth, which all seems so inevitable. It's such a cinch. It has seemed such a cinch for them to have overrode Congress, state houses, the president, governors, mayors of cities, and even the good sense of the citizens themselves.
Well, your initial question about capitalism, I mean, I honestly, there's no way that you can't look at capitalism and look at it as both a tool to both control the masses and to exploit the masses. I mean, again, the move towards the urbanization of the human social structures creates, the need to create systems to cater to the supply chains of a large and again, this isn't just a European problem. Regan was quick to remind me that Native people did cities too, but they didn't work for us either, and that's why our cities failed as well. I mean, because you end up creating this the need to have a wider and wider base to supply the people that are in those urban environments. And what's happened with much of this is you end up exploiting the people who are outside that circle of this civilized humanity, and that's why you end up having the serf system and the feudal systems, and a part of that has to do with the original aristocracy that was considered of royal or God-given rights to rule over other people. But then as capitalism changes, now you create a different type of aristocracy that is based purely on the ability to accumulate wealth. And that's what we have today. So and look, some great quotes and thanks for mentioning the book. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. I definitely do want to say that John and I differ in this opinion where I don't think urbanization is inherently evil, though I don't think that's like what you're saying, but I don't think urbanization is I don't think they could be, they're bad. It's not a bad way, but it's industrial urbanization that I see to be the evil in this. I believe that as, pre-contact indigenous folks, we had cities and sometimes they fell and sometimes they didn't, and sometimes they were great and sometimes they weren't, just like any other civilization that has ever existed. And different indigenous groups, as we're not homogeneous, have had different experiences and successfulness of having urban spaces. So I don't believe that urbanization is this is the problem. I think it's urbanization that's based in this idea of industry and industry being linked to profit. I think everyone who listens knows and understands at this point that I'm an anti-capitalist. And so I see capitalism linked to resource extraction. There's no way to create a system that isn't based on the consistent rape of the earth.
Well, and my view on this is where you and I do differ a little bit. I'm not saying that a city is inherently evil. I just think the idea of creating massive populations it's not just about resource extraction, it's about resource exploitation, because it becomes necessary. The only way that you can supply a massive amount of people in a small area is to create almost a ring of exploitation of resources to provide for it. And that in of itself isn't even necessarily the problem. It's when it does become industrialized the way you say. I think the problem with there being such a major shift towards urban populations, and New York City is an example, but it's not the only one. Of course. But this is, it breeds, again, getting right back to this virus. If you didn't have a tremendous population that was struggling between their indigenous diets and the idea that they're packed into a small area where where the average person couldn't go out and seek their own game, but instead going to these large wet markets that were this breeding ground for stuff. There's a direct connection there, and so my problem. Is there a good way to do a city? I'm sure that there is, and I would love to see the models of those things, those work out. But I think one of the ways to do it is probably always going to be tied to trying to eliminate the need for hierarchies, and that's what's usually been a part of these urban environments.
I completely agree. I think that in order to quote unquote do a city right, which what does that even look like? I think there have to be very distinct decisions that are made, and I think that those would be difficult to implement, which would be that there is no hierarchy, that it's decentralized, which I think is difficult to do, not impossible, but difficult, and that it couldn't be based in profit. Yeah. If you don't have a system based in profit, then then you have the ability to actually practice things like we were speaking about earlier, like mutual aid. Mm-hmm. Imagine a city that functions on mutual aid and reciprocity versus profit and industry. Like maybe we won't see that in our lifetime, which is, sad. But it is, it is a hope that I personally have, is that we can have these theories put into practice. But in order to do that, we have to break away from models of profit.
And that breakaway doesn't necessarily,
medical or whether it's agricultural.
It doesn't just mean geographically; it means societally, and that's what I think. What you're saying, and I agree with you. I think even within these urban environments, we can, again, make sure that we create our own networks, our own pockets of population that are going to try to do something different than what we're being inundated with. So, hey, look, I want to thank everybody for the calls today. Regan, I want to thank you for going into the studio. If we do get to a place where you and I will both be phoning in, and I don't know that that's going to happen, but I hope it doesn't. I hope I can always have you in studio there with Reggie, and hopefully I can get back there soon. But we will do this show each week. I want to thank Reggie for being such an integral part of our being able to do this show, and I want to thank you for going in there. I want to thank the callers, and I just want to assure people we'll be back here next week. So thanks for listening to Let's Talk with Regan and John.